Have you ever wondered how England became England? Not Wessex, not Mercia, not just a patchwork of battling kingdoms, but a true nation. It didn't happen in a parliament. It didn't happen with a signature on parchment. It happened on a field, in blood, in fire. In one of the most brutal, forgotten battles in British history, the year was 937 AD, 3 kings, one coalition, and a dream that refused to die. Aethelstan, grandson of Alfred the Great, stood at the head of a fragile union. Facing him, an alliance of Scots, Norsemen, and Britons determined to crush the very idea of a unified England. What unfolded wasn't just a battle. It was the moment England passed through fire and was forged into something new. In this story, you'll meet warriors who had everything to lose. A king who prayed with one hand and drew his sword with the other. And a battlefield that echoed not only with the clash of steel, but with the birth cries of a nation. So if you've ever taken the idea of England for granted, stay with me. Because once you've heard what happened at Brunanburh, you'll never hear the word England the same way again. In the annals of history, few periods are as captivating and tumultuous as the dawn of what we now call England. Long before the name England carried any real meaning, the island we now call home was a broken tapestry of kingdoms. Each thread, be it Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, Alba, or Strathclyde, woven with pride, war, and deep suspicion. Imagine, if you will, standing on a windswept hill in the early 900s. To the south, the stout-hearted farmers of Wessex whispered tales of brutal raids from the Norsemen, their longships carving through the mist like predatory beasts. To the north, the Scottish kings, fierce and unyielding, eyed their borders with a perpetual wariness, ever watchful for incursions. And in between, 1,000 power plays, alliances sealed with blood only to be broken just as quickly, a relentless dance of ambition and betrayal that defined the very landscape. There was no London as we know it, no bustling metropolis at the heart of a unified nation. There was no centralized power, no single flag that all men bowed to. Instead, the land was a mosaic of warlords and kings, each clinging to fragments of land and history, their domains defined not by intricate maps but by the arc of a sword. Loyalty was a localized affair, a personal vow to one's chieftain or lord. Identity was tribal, fiercely defended, and deeply ingrained. The very word English didn't yet unite people, it divided them, a mere descriptor for one among many disparate peoples. And then something began to shift. A tremor beneath the surface, a whisper of change carried on the biting winds. A new generation of rulers emerged, not content with mere survival, not satisfied with simply maintaining their fragmented domains. They dreamed of something bolder, something revolutionary, unity. Of a land that could one day stand as one, a single, formidable power. But in a world built on ancient rivalries, on centuries of fractured loyalties, that dream was as dangerous as it was daring. It was a vision that demanded an extraordinary leader, a figure capable of forging disparate elements into a cohesive whole. A person willing to risk everything for a future that seemed, to many, utterly unattainable. And that, my friends, is the world Aethelstan was born into. A world desperate for peace, but addicted to war. A world teetering on the precipice of an unknown future, waiting for the hand that would either plunge it into deeper chaos or lift it towards an unimaginable destiny. What kind of man could possibly rise to such a challenge? What trials would he face? What enemies would he conquer to even begin to realize such an audacious dream? Stay with me, for the story of Aethelstan is not merely a tale of kings and battles, but of the very birth of a nation, a narrative that will leave you breathless and hungry for more. Aethelstan wasn't born to peace, he was born to expectation, a heavy cloak woven from the very fabric of his lineage. His grandfather was none other than Alfred the Great, the legendary king who had not merely held back the ferocious Viking tide, but had dared to dream of a united land, a cohesive realm where fragmented loyalties might one day coalesce. From the moment Aethelstan could take his first faltering steps, whispers followed him like shadows. He has Alfred's eyes, they'd murmur, Alfred's mind, Alfred's destiny. But destiny, as the sagas teach us, rarely arrives as a simple gift, laid at one's feet like a crown. It must be earned, often forged in the brutal crucible of conflict and sacrifice. Aethelstan's father, Edward the Elder, had continued Alfred's arduous mission, relentlessly pushing back against the pagan Norsemen and steadily expanding Wessex's influence. Yet for all his father's triumphs, the island remained a fractured mosaic, a patchwork of kingdoms held together by uneasy truces and the ever-present threat of renewed strife. When Edward finally succumbed to the inevitable in 924, the heavy mantle of the throne passed to Aethelstan. He was young, undeniably ambitious, and already hardened by the unforgiving politics of power that permeated every royal court. His ascension, however, was far from universally welcomed. Some shrewd nobles, clinging to their ancient privileges, feared his burgeoning authority, sensing a king who would demand more than mere fealty. Others, with a more pragmatic eye, doubted his untested mettle, questioning if this young man could truly succeed where so many others had faltered. The North, particularly, seethed with an untamed restlessness, its powerful lords and Viking settlers wary of southern encroachment. And the Scots, ever watchful from their rugged highlands, regarded him with deep suspicion, their borders a line drawn in the sand, daring him to cross. But Aethelstan, even in his early 20s, did not flinch. He possessed a clarity of vision that many older, more jaded kings never grasped. That unity was not about conquest alone. True unity, he understood, was about a shared purpose, a collective identity, a future built on something more enduring than the fleeting triumph of the sword. He surrounded himself not with sycophants, but with the sharpest minds and most formidable wills. Scholars to unravel the past, clerics to guide the spirit, and seasoned warriors to enforce his will. He plunged into the study of law and history, seeking the wisdom of ages past to illuminate the path forward. He honed his skill in swordsmanship, for a king must be a warrior, but he also diligently trained in statecraft, for a king must be a builder. And above all, he listened to the grizzled veterans of countless campaigns, their voices rough with experience, to foreign envoys bearing news of distant lands and shifting alliances, and perhaps most importantly to the very wind itself, whispering across a divided land, yearning for a single voice to call it home. They say he once gathered his council, his gaze sweeping over their faces, and declared with an unwavering conviction that chilled some and inspired others. If we cannot bind this island by law and loyalty, then, by God, we will bind it with our bones. Bold words indeed. But for Aethelstan, they were not merely the poetic flourish of a young monarch eager to impress. They were a profound declaration, a personal oath, and a chilling prophecy. For the path to a united England would demand not just blood, but an iron will, an unshakable conviction, and a willingness to confront the deepest, most ancient rivalries this scarred land had ever known. And what battles, you might wonder, would be fought to fulfill such a daring prophecy? What sacrifices would be made, what betrayals endured, before the dream of a single English crown could truly take root? The answer, my friends, lies in the tumultuous years that followed, years that would forever etch Aethelstan's name into the very bedrock of this island's history. And believe me, you will not want to miss a single pivotal moment. While other kings of his era might have squabbled over mere parcels of land or fleeting power, Aethelstan fought for something far grander, something that had never truly existed before. An idea. He envisioned a single, unified kingdom, an unbroken entity stretching from the sun-drenched southern shores to the shadowed, mist-wreathed mountains of the north. One language would bind its people, one law would govern their lives, and a single banner would fly proudly over all. But dreams of such monumental scale are rarely welcomed with open arms. To the proud Welsh princes, the fierce Scottish kings, and the resilient Norse settlers who had carved out their own domains, Aethelstan's audacious vision wasn't noble, it was a perilous threat. Unity for him meant subjugation for them, a crushing of their ancient customs, their distinct identities, and their very way of life. The very notion of a single English crown was an affront to their sovereignty, a declaration of war on their ancestral lands. And yet, with an unwavering resolve that would define his reign, Aethelstan pressed forward. He was a master of both the subtle art of diplomacy and the brutal reality of warfare. He negotiated with kings, his words as sharp as any blade, seeking alliances where possible. He arranged strategic marriages between powerful noble houses, weaving a complex web of familial ties designed to bind the disparate elements of the island. He offered lavish gifts, knowing that sometimes loyalty could be bought or at least rented through generosity. But when diplomacy, however artful, inevitably failed, Aethelstan did not hesitate. His armies, disciplined and formidable, moved swiftly. Northumbria, once a proud Viking stronghold, felt the weight of his influence, its pagan lords compelled to acknowledge his overlordship. Mercia, a kingdom that had for centuries stood as a formidable rival to Wessex, now found itself fighting under the same command, its warriors marching beneath Aethelstan's burgeoning banner. Even the fiercely independent Welsh, for a time, acknowledged his supreme authority, their mountain strongholds yielding to his growing might. But Aethelstan didn't merely conquer land. He seized symbols, understanding their profound power to shape identity. From the vanquished, he took royal regalia, ancient texts filled with forgotten lore, and even holy relics, each item a testament to his expanding dominion. With every successful campaign, he wasn't just expanding territory. He was meticulously, almost reverently, weaving the very fabric of a national identity, piece by painstaking piece. He was crafting the narrative of a nascent England, a story of shared destiny under one sovereign. However, power has a gravity of its own, a relentless force that pulls disparate elements together, yet simultaneously creates immense pressure. The more Aethelstan pulled England together, the more desperately others pulled away, sensing their own worlds shrinking, their own traditions eroding. In Alba, the wise and cunning King Constantine II, a monarch who had long navigated the treacherous waters of Anglo-Saxon expansion, began to see the ominous writing on the wall. In Dublin, the formidable Norse ruler Olaf, keenly aware of his ancestral claim to Northumbria, felt his grasp on that vital territory slipping with each of Aethelstan's victories. And in Strathclyde, King Owain watched the horizon darken, knowing that the English storm was gathering, threatening to engulf his kingdom entirely. What Aethelstan proclaimed as unity, they called conquest. And the lines were being drawn not in ink but in blood and ancient grievances. The stage was set, the players assembled, and the air crackled with tension. What would happen when these powerful forces inevitably collided? What terrible cost would be paid for Aethelstan's grand design? The answer, my dear reader, would shake the very foundations of the British Isles. A clash that would determine the fate of kingdoms and forge the very name of a nation in fire and steel. Prepare yourself, for the storm was indeed beginning to form, and its fury would be epic. Initially, it began subtly, like the first ominous gusts before a hurricane. It was in the hushed whispers carried on the wind, a royal letter left pointedly unanswered, a messenger once welcomed now curtly turned away at a fortified border. These were not mere slights. They were declarations, silent yet profound, that the tides of power were shifting. Then the true storm began to gather, not with a roar but with the ominous forging of alliances. Olaf Guthfrithson, the formidable king of the Norse Gaels in Dublin, possessed a potent claim to the north of England, a claim steeped in blood and ancestral memory. His forebears had reigned supreme in York, their longships dominating the eastern coasts. Now Aethelstan's audacious reach into Northumbria, swallowing up territories Olaf considered his birthright, felt like a direct, personal insult, a challenge that could not be ignored. To the north, in Alba, the land we now know as Scotland, King Constantine II presided over a kingdom he had ruled for decades. He was a monarch of exceptional shrewdness and vast experience, deeply protective of Scottish independence, a trait forged in countless border skirmishes and diplomatic chess matches. His daughter was bound in marriage to Olaf, a union that sealed far more than a mere political treaty. It was a pact written in the shared fear of Aethelstan's relentless expansion, a solemn oath forged in the crucible of mutual apprehension. And to the south of Alba, nestled amidst ancient hills in the proud kingdom of Strathclyde, King Owain I watched the inexorable rise of Wessex with profound dread. His people, the ancient Britons, were neither fully Norse nor Saxon. They saw themselves as a proud and unique culture, clinging fiercely to their distinctive heritage in a world of encroaching empires. And they knew, with a chilling certainty, that Aethelstan's grand dream of unity did not, and could not, include their cherished independence. These three kings, the ruthless Norseman, the cunning Scot, and the defiant Briton, had remarkably little in common. Their languages were alien to one another's ears, their faith traditions diverged, and they had, for generations, been each other's fiercest enemies. Yet they shared one urgent, undeniable truth that transcended all their differences. If they did not stop Aethelstan now with all their combined might, there might never be another chance. His ambition was a tidal wave, threatening to engulf them all. And so, in an act of profound desperation, they put aside centuries of bitter rivalries. They forged a rare and fragile coalition, an unholy trinity united not by trust, for that was a luxury they could ill afford, but by the cold, unifying grip of fear. It was a gamble of the highest stakes, a desperate throw of the dice against a king who seemed destined to reshape the very map of the island. And in the scorching summer of 937, with the sun beating down on a land ripe for conflict, they began to move. Armies vast and formidable gathered in the shadowed valleys and along the windswept coasts. Longships laden with warriors launched from hidden inlets, their prows cutting through the waves. Marches began across ancient paths, the rhythmic tramp of thousands of feet shaking the very earth. Aethelstan's audacious dream, the very bedrock of his reign, was about to be tested as it had never been before. It was about to be tested by fire, by iron, and by the desperate fury of a combined host determined to crush the nascent idea of England before it could ever truly breathe. The greatest battle of his life, a clash that would decide the fate of kingdoms and define the very identity of a nation, was now inevitable. And its echoes, I assure you, would reverberate through history for 1,000 years. The storm broke with a fury that would forever be etched into the annals of memory. They came from every direction, a tide of vengeance and desperation converging upon the nascent dream of England. From the west, Olaf Guthfrithson, the audacious king of Dublin, launched his formidable fleet of longships. Their dragon-headed prows, grim and foreboding, sliced through the churning, gray waters of the Irish Sea. Chroniclers of the age still debate his precise landing. Some whisper of a strategic debarkation on the western coast, perhaps near the marshy flats of modern-day Wirral, a quiet shore for the unleashing of a hurricane. Others contend he slipped with chilling stealth up the winding Mersey or the broad Humber, seeking an unsuspecting point to unleash his seasoned warriors upon Aethelstan's burgeoning dominion. From the north, King Constantine's Scottish forces descended with a grim, relentless resolve, pouring through the rugged valleys like a pack of wolves emerging from the ancient mountains. Along their relentless march, they were met by Owain of Strathclyde, his men the hardy Britons of the west, their faces etched with the scars of generations of border warfare, their spears glinting with a fierce, defiant pride. It was an army built on primal fear, the fear of a future where their distinct identities would be swallowed whole, and on a desperate, burning hope. The hope that together, this disparate, he knew the threat was not merely real, it was existential. The combined might of his enemies represented the greatest challenge to his reign, perhaps even to the very concept of a unified England. He could have chosen caution, retreated to the more easily defended south, consolidating his power. Instead, with a boldness that bordered on recklessness, he marched north. His advance was swift, relentless, a whirlwind of purpose. Some chroniclers believe he swept directly from Mercia, drawing his forces from every corner of his still fragile kingdom, consolidating his strength as he advanced into the heartland of his enemies. His warriors were fewer in number perhaps, but their hearts beat with an unshakable resolve, unburdened by fear. They had fought side by side, these Saxons and Angles, Mercians and Northumbrians, against the relentless tide of Viking raiders, against stubborn rebels, and against rival kings who sought to undermine their burgeoning unity. They trusted their leader implicitly, a trust forged in the crucible of shared campaigns and hard-won victories. And they understood with a clarity that sharpened their blades what was truly at stake. They weren't defending merely a king, a temporary sovereign on a temporary throne. No, they were defending a country that did not yet exist, a concept barely whispered in the grand halls of power, but one that could, if they bled for it, rise from the ashes of ancient rivalries. They fought for a future, for a unified identity, for a shared destiny that lay just beyond the horizon of this bloody field. And somewhere, in the unforgiving mists and rolling hills of northern England, the two titanic forces converged. The air itself seemed to crackle with anticipation, the silence before the storm more terrifying than any war cry. The field that would become legend, a place forever scarred by the monumental clash, now waited. What unspeakable horrors, what heroic sacrifices, what decisive turns of fate would this land bear witness to? The answer lies in the blood and thunder of the battle that was about to unfold, a battle that would determine not just the fate of kings, but the very existence of a nation. Prepare yourself, for the saga of Brunanburh, the forging fire of England, is about to begin. Dawn broke pale and cold over the field. There is no map that can show us exactly where it happened. Was it the Wirral Peninsula? Somewhere in Yorkshire, Lancashire, the land keeps its secrets, but the chronicles remember the storm. Thousands of warriors stood in formation. On one side, the coalition, Olaf's Norsemen, Constantine's Scots, Owain's Britons. On the other, Aethelstan's Anglo-Saxon host, smaller in number but drilled, disciplined, and dangerously determined. Shield walls locked, banners snapped in the wind. The ground, still wet with morning dew, would soon run red. Aethelstan stood at the center of his line beside his younger half-brother Edmund, a prince not yet king but already seasoned in war. Together they held the center, anchoring the army with grit and fire. Then the horns blew. And chaos descended, swords clashed, arrows screamed. The air filled with roars, with prayers, with the final gasps of dying men. Viking axes bit into Saxon shields. Scottish spears broke against English steel. Every charge was answered, every flank tested. The Anglo-Saxon formations held. They bent but did not break. Years of warfare had taught them to move as one, to strike not with fury, but with rhythm. Edmund fought like a man possessed, rallying the line wherever it threatened to crumble. Veterans of old Viking sieges stood firm beside him, men who had lost sons to raids and had no intention of losing England too. Then came the blood-turning blow. Constantine's son, his heir, fell in battle, struck down while leading an assault. The Scots reeled, their morale shattered. Still the battle raged, hour after hour. Until finally, with a last desperate surge, Aethelstan's forces pushed through. The coalition broke. Olaf fled to his ships, wounded pride trailing behind him. Constantine retreated north, a king in mourning. Owain's men vanished into the hills, defeated. Silence fell, except for the moans of the wounded and the ravens circling above. Victory is rarely clean. The field was a graveyard, blood-soaked, mud-churned, strewn with the broken bodies of kings and commoners alike. The scent of iron clung to the wind. No songs were sung that day. Only groans, whispers, and the quiet sobs of men who had survived. But Aethelstan had done what no one before him had. He didn't just win a battle. He shattered a coalition that had united three powerful kingdoms. He proved that England, this fragile idea, was more than ambition. It could endure the storm. His army had fought not as Mercian or Wessex or Northumbrian but as one. That unity, tested in fire, sealed in sacrifice, was the true victory. It wasn't that Aethelstan had more men. He didn't. It wasn't that his warriors were stronger. They weren't. It was structure. It was leadership. It was belief. His command structure was clear. His forces knew why they fought, and they believed not just in their king, but in the country he was building. Olaf's forces, by contrast, fought for fear of losing power. Constantine's men were brave, but stunned by the loss of their prince. Owain's warriors were courageous, but outmatched and overwhelmed. When the tide turned, it turned fast. What had seemed like a unified front became a desperate retreat. And as the dust settled, Aethelstan stood not just as victor, but as something Britain had never truly seen before. A national king. One land, one crown, one name that would echo across centuries: England. Brunanburh did not end all wars, but it ended doubt. In the eyes of his people and his enemies, Aethelstan was no longer just a regional power. He was now the undisputed king of the English. His reach extended from the southern coast to the banks of the River Tweed. No other monarch could challenge that claim. For the Vikings, the defeat was crushing. Olaf returned to Dublin, his hopes of reclaiming Northumbria shattered. Though Norse raiders would still haunt the coasts for generations, never again would they threaten England with such a unified force. The Scots and Britons, too, retreated. Their leaders licked wounds and rebuilt. Scotland would rise again in the centuries to come, but not to dominate England. That dream had died on the fields of Brunanburh, and something new had been born, a shared sense of destiny, of purpose, of identity. The word English began to mean more than just language or ancestry. It began to mean loyalty to a land, to a crown, to an idea bigger than any one man. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle didn't just record the event, it celebrated it in verse. A national poem for a national birth. It called Brunanburh the greatest slaughter since the Anglo-Saxons had first crossed the seas. Not with horror, with awe, Aethelstan ruled for just 2 more years. He died in 939, still a young man, but what he left behind was a foundation, a path for future kings, a banner under which generations would march, build, and dream. England had been imagined before. Now it was real. Some battles are remembered in numbers, how many fought, how many died, but Brunanburh lives on in verse. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, our most ancient national record, didn't just note the victory, it sang it. In a poem of thunderous language and haunting rhythm, it captured the emotion that no chronicle could truly contain. Never yet before this was there a greater slaughter of a host slain by the edges of swords. These were not cold facts. They were lines etched with pride, grief, and awe. The poem doesn't just name the fallen, it honors them. It elevates Brunanburh from battle to myth. In the centuries that followed, poets, chroniclers, and scholars returned to that field, if not in body, then in memory. They called it England's Thermopylae, its birth cry, its trial by fire. And yet, the land itself remains silent. We still don't know exactly where Brunanburh happened. Theories point to the Wirral, to Yorkshire, to Lancashire. But the earth has buried its scars. No bones, no weapons, no flags have confirmed the truth. Only the words remain, and maybe that's fitting, because Brunanburh wasn't just a place, it was a moment. When the scattered voices of a divided land spoke for the first time with one name, a poem couldn't preserve the battlefield, but it preserved the soul of a nation. It's easy to forget battles, names fade, borders shift. The dead rest quietly beneath fields now sown with crops, not swords. But Brunanburh endures, not because of where it was fought, but because of what it meant. It was the moment when England could no longer be dismissed as a collection of tribes or a temporary alliance. It was proof that unity could survive war and even be born from it. Without Brunanburh, there might have been no England as we know it. No single crown, No unbroken thread from Saxon kings to the modern monarchy. No shared story binding the South and the North. The battle didn't erase division, it didn't silence rebellion, it didn't even stop war. But it created the conditions for something deeper